The desert had a way of keeping secrets. Beneath the endless sky, where stars lit the night like scattered fire, the land whispered of old stories of men who rode with courage, of women who carried burdens of fear and hope, and of warriors who would not bow, even when the world tried to break them. The frontier was no gentle place. It was a world where shadows carried danger, and where survival often meant more than strength meant heart. It was in this harsh, untamed land that a tale of love and danger began to unfold, one that would test loyalty, courage, and the will to fight against impossible odds. She had not meant to wander far from the safety of her home. The ranch was small, tucked against the edge of the wild country, and the warnings had been clear: do not stray where the land stretches into silence. Yet sometimes fate ignores warnings. The young woman had gone out with the fading sun still high in the sky, only to find herself caught in a storm of events she could never have prepared for. She was taken, not with cruelty at first, but with swiftness, as though her captors knew the desert well enough to vanish with her before a cry could even carry back to the homestead. Her disappearance was more than a loss. It was a spark that lit a fire in the heart of one man who refused to let her fate be sealed by the cruelty of others. He was an Apache warrior, strong in spirit and steady in his purpose. The land was his blood, the wind his ally, and yet, when he learned of her plight, he carried something more powerful than any weapon. He carried a vow. Though the two came from different worlds, his heart knew what it meant to love, and he could not turn away while danger closed around her. The frontier was no stranger to kidnappings. Rival tribes, outlaw bands, and desperate men often used fear as their weapon. But this time, the struggle was not about land or vengeance. This time, it was about a woman whose quiet courage had touched the soul of a man whom many believed could never love outside his people. The Apache warrior had seen her before, had known the kindness in her eyes when she once offered him water during a time of hunger. That small act of humanity had planted a seed, one that grew stronger in silence until the day it was tested by fire. Now, with her taken into the wilderness, the warrior faced a path laced with peril. He knew the captors would not keep her safe. The desert was unforgiving, and men who stole did not always steal with care. He also knew he would stand alone, for many on the frontier would not lift a hand to save a woman bound to a fate written by others. They would whisper that it was not their place, or that no one could stand against the dangers that lay between her and freedom. But where others saw the end, he saw the beginning of a fight that mattered more than life itself. The trail he followed was marked in silence. A broken branch here, a disturbed patch of soil there, and the faint impression of a boot pressed into sand. His eyes caught it all, sharper than a hawk's, trained by years of survival in lands where only the strong endured. Each step brought him closer to the men who had stolen her away, and with each step the weight of his vow grew heavier. Yet it was not despair that guided him, but a steady fire that could not be put out. Far ahead, the woman felt the weight of fear pressing down on her heart. She tried to stay calm, to remember that panic would only feed her captor's control. The desert night grew colder, and every sound seemed louder in the silence. She thought of her family, of the life that had been stolen from her in a single moment. And though her body trembled, her spirit did not yield. Somewhere deep within, she carried hope, a belief that someone, somehow, would not abandon her. That faith became her anchor as shadows moved around her and strange voices echoed in the darkness. The Apache warrior pressed on, his mind torn between fury and focus. He remembered the way her voice had once carried kindness when others had spoken only with suspicion. He remembered how she had not looked at him with fear, even when others had. Those memories fueled him, reminding him that this was not simply a battle against enemies, but a stand for something greater, something pure in a world often marred by hatred. Danger followed him as closely as his own shadow. The wilderness was filled with threats beyond men, the rattlesnake hidden in dry brush, the sudden storm that could wash away all signs of a trail, and the wolves that prowled with hungry eyes. Yet nothing compared to the danger of facing armed men who believed they owned the woman's fate. He knew the moment would come when steel and courage would clash, and in that moment he would need every ounce of his spirit. Each night, as he closed his eyes for only a breath of rest, he saw her face in his mind. Her voice whispered through the silence, not with fear, but with quiet strength, urging him forward. The line between dream and reality blurred, but his resolve never wavered. He was not a man to surrender, not to fear, not to doubt. He was a warrior, and this fight was not only for her life, was for the love that bound his heart to hers. As dawn rose across the land, painting the horizon with shades of fire, the Apache warrior caught the first true sign of his enemy. The smoke of a distant campfire curled upward, faint against the sky, but clear to his eyes. His heartbeat quickened, not with fear, but with readiness. He knew she was near. He also knew that the men who held her would not let her go without a fight. The desert was quiet in that hour, but it carried a sense of unease, as if the earth itself held its breath. The woman sat bound near the camp, her eyes scanning the distance as though her heart could feel the warrior drawing closer. The captors laughed and spoke in harsh tones, careless in their pride. They did not see the storm building beyond their firelight. Somewhere beyond the ridge, the warrior tightened his grip on the bow in his hand, his gaze fixed on the camp below. His heart pounded, not just with the call to battle, but with the knowledge that love-real, unshaken love was worth every wound, every scar, every risk. He drew a slow breath, steadying himself as the firelight flickered against the night. The moment had come to decide not only her fate, but his own. And as the wind shifted and the fire crackled in the enemy's camp, he took his first step down the ridge. Knowing that every heartbeat carried him closer to the fight of his life, and to the woman whose spirit had captured his soul. The desert held its silence, waiting for what would come, as danger and love stood side by side, ready to collide. The warrior stayed hidden among the rocks, his eyes never leaving the faint glow of the campfire below. The smoke curled slowly into the morning air, rising like a signal he was meant to follow. He could hear the faint sound of men's voices drifting up the ridge, sharp with laughter, careless as though they believed no one would dare challenge them. But he knew the truth of men like this. They were bold only when they believed themselves untouchable, cruel only when the odds were heavy in their favor. Their mistake was underestimating the silence of the land, the way it could carry a warrior closer without ever betraying his presence. His heart beat steady, though each pulse seemed louder in his ears than the voices below. He thought of the woman bound near that fire, imagined her sitting still, eyes searching the horizon even when her body was too tired to move. He could almost see the fear she carried, though he believed she held herself with quiet strength. That thought gave him reason to wait, to watch, to plan. A warrior who rushed was a warrior who bled before his time, and he had no intention of failing her now. The land stretched wide around them, harsh and beautiful at once. Dry grasses bent in the breeze, sagebrush clung stubbornly to the earth, and the horizon seemed to stretch on forever. To anyone else, it was an endless desert, but to him, it was a map alive with secrets. He had been taught to read it since boyhood the way a broken stem could reveal the weight of a traveler, the way dust carried the memory of a passing boot. Every sign told a story, and every story led him closer to the truth. For the woman, the hours blurred into a haze of uncertainty. The fire crackled, the ropes bit into her wrists, and her captors spoke in a language she only partly understood. She caught fragments plans of moving her farther into the wild, talk of trading her as though she were no more than a piece of property. Each word sent a chill deeper into her chest, yet she kept her face calm, her spirit unbroken. She knew panic would only feed their control, and though fear pressed heavy on her, she clung to hope as tightly as her breath. Somewhere in the shadows of her mind, she believed rescue was near. The warrior had not forgotten the moment he first saw her. It was not in this place, not under the cold eyes of captors, but in a time when the land was heavy with drought. His people had gone hungry, water scarce, and she had stepped forward when others held back. She had offered him water from her hands, clear and simple, but given without judgment. That act had burned itself into his memory, not with the force of fire, but with the steady glow of kindness. It was then that he knew her spirit was strong, and it was that same spirit he carried with him now as he followed her trail through the wilderness. The captors believed the desert would hide them, but they had forgotten how many eyes the land could hold. Coyotes prowled the edges, ravens circled overhead, and the wind itself carried whispers. The warrior moved like part of the earth, unseen yet always near. He studied the camp from the ridge, counting how many men stood guard, how they carried themselves, and which way their horses were tied. He learned their patterns, their weaknesses, the cracks in the shield they thought unbreakable. Back at the camp, the woman's thoughts wandered to her family, the homestead, and the life she feared she might never see again. She remembered mornings filled with the sound of cattle lowing, evenings when the air carried the smell of fresh bread and the safety of familiar walls. She remembered the warnings her father had given her about the dangers beyond the ranch, and though she regretted not listening more closely, she refused to surrender to despair. She whispered a silent prayer that someone was searching, that she was not forgotten. Her captors were not men of honor. She could see it in the way they treated each other, quick to argue over food or direction, quicker still to boast of victories that belonged more to cruelty than courage. They carried themselves like men who had lived too long in the shadow of violence, hardened not by necessity, but by choice. She listened, learned, and stored every detail away, for knowledge was her only weapon. The warrior's mind moved with quiet calculation. He knew he could not strike too soon, for a single mistake could cost her life. Yet waiting carried its own danger. The longer she stayed in their hands, the farther they might carry her, and the stronger their plans might grow. He needed patience, but he also needed resolve. The balance was as delicate as the edge of his blade. Night fell once more across the desert, the stars sharp against the sky. From the ridge, the warrior watched the camp grow quiet. The men laughed less as weariness took hold, their bodies sinking closer to sleep, though one or two still kept watch with heavy eyes. The fire burned low, casting long shadows across the ground. The woman sat near the edge of the camp, bound but not broken, her eyes lifted toward the horizon as though she could feel the weight of someone out there, someone who refused to leave her to fate. As the night deepened, the warrior closed his eyes for a moment, listening not just to the world around him, but to the memory of his people. His elders had spoken often of courage, of the strength it took not only to fight, but to fight for what was just. They had said that true warriors were not measured by the blood on their hands, but by the lives they protected. Their voices echoed in his heart now, guiding his steps as surely as the stars above. He thought again of the woman, her act of kindness, the way she had looked at him without fear. That look had cut through the bitterness of the world and reminded him of what it meant to be seen not as enemy, not as savage, but simply as man. That memory lit the fire in him brighter than any hatred could. It was love, unspoken yet unshakable, and it carried him forward. Below, the camp shifted uneasily. A horse stamped its hooves, restless in the dark, as if sensing something the men could not. The wind grew colder, carrying the faintest sound of movement across the rocks. The woman's eyes flickered toward the ridge, her heart quickening, though she did not know why. I felt it more than saw it, a presence in the night, a force drawing near with purpose. The captors, still blind to the storm building against them, muttered among themselves. Their confidence blinded them, their greed made them careless. They did not hear the warning carried in the silence of the desert. They did not see the shadow of a warrior watching with eyes sharpened by love and vengeance. The woman's heart raced as she turned her gaze to the horizon once more. Hope burned faintly in her chest, fragile but alive. Somewhere beyond the edge of the firelight, someone moved closer, step by step, unseen but unstoppable. She tightened her jaw, holding on to the thought that she was not alone, that the desert itself had not abandoned her. The warrior crouched lower, his muscles steady, his spirit ready. He could feel the moment drawing near, the distance between them shrinking with every heartbeat. The firelight flickered against the night, and the desert waited, silent and breathless, for what was about to come. And as the wind shifted once more, carrying the faint crackle of the dying fire, the warrior set his gaze on the camp. Knowing the next move would decide everything, not only her fate, but his own. The fire burned lower as the night dragged on, its glow barely enough to push back the darkness. The captors huddled around it, half asleep, voices muttering in broken conversation that trailed into silence. They believed the desert was their shield, wide and empty enough to hide their trail. But the desert had never been empty. It carried memory in every stone, sound in every gust of wind, and watchful eyes in the silence. From the ridge, the Apache warrior waited, measuring every movement, his gaze locked on the woman who sat near the edge of the camp with her wrists bound. He felt the pull of two worlds pressing against him. On one side was the rage of a man who longed to strike, to cut through the night and tear her from the grip of those who dared steal her. On the other was the discipline of a warrior, the lessons etched into him from boyhood, the reminder that fury without patience was nothing but ruin. Every muscle in his body wanted to move, yet he held still, his breath steady as the stars above. Down by the fire, one of the men stirred, glancing toward the woman. His eyes lingered longer than before, and the warrior felt the tension rise like a blade at his throat. He gripped the bow in his hand, ready if the moment demanded, but the man only spat into the dirt, muttered something to his companion, and lay back again. Still, the unease stayed, a sharp reminder that time was against him. The longer she remained their prisoner, the greater the danger became. The woman's heart had learned to mask its fear, but she could not stop her mind from racing. Every word the men spoke painted darker pictures in her imagination. They argued about where to take her, some saying north toward the mountains, others insisting east toward a settlement that would pay well for a captive. She listened carefully, even if the words were not always clear, for she knew each detail mattered. Somewhere in her chest, a small flame of hope continued to burn, though it flickered with each passing hour. She believed someone was near, watching, perhaps moving closer through the night, but she dared not show it on her face. The warrior shifted silently among the rocks, keeping his eyes on her. He thought of his people, of the campfires where elders told stories of honor, and of the lessons they gave about protecting what was sacred. His heart wrestled with the truth that this woman, though not of his tribe, had become sacred to him. She had given him something simple, yet rare on the frontier: respect. That respect had turned into something deeper, something he had no words for, but felt with every breath. It was why he could not leave her, why he was ready to risk all that remained of his life for her freedom. As the night wore thin, the camp grew restless again. A horse snorted, ears pricking at sounds unseen, and one of the men cursed softly as he rose to check the rope tying the animals. The warrior crouched lower, knowing even the moonlight could betray him if he moved too soon. He pressed his hand to the earth, steadying himself with the feel of the land. The desert had always been his ally, and he trusted it now as much as the blade at his side. While he waited, his mind turned to another conflict. He knew that even if he saved her, their path would not be easy. The ranchers and settlers saw his people as enemies, threats to be driven off the land. If he brought her back, would they welcome him as her rescuer, or would they turn on him the moment they saw his face? The thought weighed heavy, but not enough to slow him. Her life came first, and what followed after could be faced when the time arrived. Back at the ranch, her family had already begun their own struggle. Her father had gathered men from nearby homesteads, their voices rising with anger at the thought of raiders stealing one of their own. They spoke of revenge more than rescue, of riding hard to punish whoever had taken her. Yet even as they sharpened their rifles and saddled their horses, doubt filled the air. The land was vast, the trails too many, and their anger could not lead them straight to her. Some whispered that it was hopeless, that she would never be returned. Oh my God. But her father refused to believe it. He swore to ride until his strength was gone, no matter where the trail might lead. The warrior did not know of the search parties forming beyond the horizon, but he felt the pressure of time closing around him. He needed to move soon. He studied the guards once more, counted their weapons, and marked their weakest points. Yet before he could act, a howl broke across the desert night. A lone wolf's cry carried on the wind, sending a shiver through the camp. The horses stamped nervously, and one of the men rose with a curse, kicking at the dirt as if he could silence the wild. The woman's eyes lifted at the sound. Something in it stirred her spirit, as though the cry belonged not only to the wild but to the promise of freedom. She shifted slightly, testing the ropes at her wrists, though she kept her movements small. Every heartbeat told her the moment was drawing closer, though she could not see how or when it would come. The captors muttered about wolves, about omens, about restless spirits of the land. They were not men of faith, but the wilderness had a way of planting unease, even in the most hardened hearts. The warrior knew this well. He crouched lower, blending into the silence, waiting for their distraction to grow deeper. Yet, even as he prepared, another subplot unfolded beyond their camp. Farther west, a band of outlaws traveled toward the same region, carrying greed in their hearts and rifles at their sides. They had no knowledge of the woman, no connection to her captors, but fate often drew men together in unexpected ways. The land was not wide enough to keep every trail separate, and soon their path would cross into the same country. Trouble was brewing on more than one front, though none of the players yet saw the full picture. As dawn began to stir at the edges of the sky, the tension thickened. The fire in the camp burned low, leaving more shadow than light. The men shifted, half awake, their nerves frayed by the sounds of the night. The woman sat still, her body weary, but her spirit watching, waiting. And from the ridge, the warrior's eyes narrowed, his decision hardening like stone. The desert held its silence once more, but it was not the silence of peace. It was the silence before a storm, the silence that comes when the earth itself knows that something is about to change. The warrior's breath came slow, steady, his hand resting on the bow that had never failed him. He could feel the weight of the moment pressing closer, the conflict sharpening with every heartbeat. The woman's pulse quickened as the horizon began to glow faintly with morning light. She sensed that the world around her was shifting, that danger and salvation both moved closer with each passing breath. Her captors stirred, muttering about the day's journey, but she barely heard them. Her eyes lifted once more toward the ridge, her heart whispering the same silent hope. And in that fragile space between night and dawn, the warrior rose slightly from his crouch, his silhouette hidden against the rocks. His spirit was ready, his vow unbroken, his heart burning with the fire of love and battle. The conflict had not yet come, but its shadow stretched long across the desert, wrapping every soul in its grip. The camp did not yet know it, the woman could not yet see it, but the moment of reckoning was drawing nearer. The desert was waiting, the wind was listening, and every heartbeat carried them closer to the clash that would decide not only her fate, but the fate of everyone who dared walk into this story. The first light of morning broke over the desert, washing the land in shades of red and gold. The camp below stirred, the captors rising one by one, stretching stiff muscles and stoking the fire back to life. Their careless chatter carried across the sand, the kind of talk men use to hide their unease. The woman sat silently, her wrists raw from the ropes, her body weary, but her spirit awake and listening. Each sound from beyond the camp sharpened her senses. She could not see him, but she felt him near, watching, waiting, readying himself for the moment that would change everything. The Apache warrior crouched low behind the ridge, eyes narrowed as he studied every move. He had tracked men before, but never had his heart been so bound to the outcome. He knew each mistake could cost her life, and the weight of that truth pressed on his shoulders like stone. Yet his spirit did not bend. The fire that drove him was stronger than fear, stronger than doubt. He watched their every step, memorized their rhythm, waiting for the perfect moment when shadows and silence could be his allies. One of the men cursed as a horse pulled against its rope, restless in the rising light. The warrior marked him as the quickest-tempered, the kind most likely to act before thinking. Another sat chewing on dried meat, slow and dull, distracted by hunger. A third stood with his rifle slung loose, his eyes scanning the horizon but never truly seeing. The warrior measured them all, not as men but as obstacles between him and the woman he had sworn to protect. The woman's heart pounded as the men began to argue about which path to take. One wanted to head toward the mountains. Another spoke of a canyon where they might rest unseen. Their disagreement grew heated, voices sharp, gestures rough. She kept her face still, but inside she felt a flicker of hope. Their unity was already cracking, and cracks meant weakness. Still, she dared not let her hope rise too far, for weakness in them could also mean cruelty falling on her if their tempers grew too wild. Far away, the woman's father rode hard across the desert with a small group of men at his side. Dust rose behind their horses, their faces grim with determination. They had followed every rumor, every faint trail, refusing to surrender. The father's eyes burned with the kind of desperation only a parent could carry. He swore that he would not rest until his daughter was back, even if it meant riding straight into danger. Yet, among his group, whispers of doubt grew louder. Some feared they were riding straight into a trap. Others wondered if she had already been lost to the wilderness. But the father's will drove them on, for his voice carried the weight of love and fury too strong to ignore. The warrior did not know of their pursuit, but he could feel the pulse of fate quickening, as if the desert itself sensed that many paths were beginning to cross. He knew the captors would soon force the woman onto a horse and move again, farther into the wild. If they vanished deeper, the chance of striking without risk would vanish too. His body coiled like a bowstring, his spirit whispering that the time was near. The captors loaded their packs, muttering about the heat of the day ahead. They pulled the woman roughly to her feet, tying her hands tighter before forcing her toward one of the horses. She stumbled, but kept her chin high, refusing to let them see her fear. She lifted her gaze once more toward the ridge, toward the horizon beyond, and though she could not see him, she whispered a silent plea to the one she believed was near. From his perch above, the warrior's hand tightened on his bow. He saw the way she steadied herself, the strength she carried even in her weakness. That strength was what bound him to her, what made his vow unshakable. He moved quietly along the ridge, step by step, circling closer to the camp without breaking cover. Every muscle in his body burned with the need to strike, but still he waited, listening to the rhythm of their movements, searching for the perfect opening. The men mounted their horses, two of them pulling her up onto the saddle between them. Her hands remained bound, but her eyes burned with defiance, refusing to drop in surrender. The warrior's chest tightened as he saw her carried higher as the camp began to break apart. The moment was slipping, the chance thinning with every step they took away from the fire. He lowered himself against the rocks, breathing steady, his spirit whispering to the earth for strength. The horses shifted into motion, hooves striking against the dry ground. Dust rose, cloaking the camp in a pale haze. The warrior's heart pounded as he followed along the ridge, shadowing their movement with silent steps. He knew the clash was close now. The desert carried the weight of it, heavy and unspoken. The woman's eyes lifted once more, and for the briefest breath she thought she saw movement in the rocks, a shadow that did not belong to stone. Hope flared, fierce and bright, even as she kept her face unreadable to those around her. The captors rode on, their voices carrying across a land. They spoke of trade, of reward, of what they would gain. Their laughter was harsh, a sound that scraped against the silence of the desert. The warrior's jaw tightened. Each word only fueled his resolve. These men did not see her as human, did not see the sacred bond of love and honor that tied him to her. To them, she was nothing but a prize. To him, she was everything. Hours passed as they moved deeper into the wild. The sun rose high, the heat pressing down like a weight. The men grew weary, their laughter fading into grumbles. The woman's strength faltered, her body aching, but her spirit still refused to break. She kept her thoughts on the ridge, on the shadow she thought she had seen, on the promise of rescue that burned quietly in her chest. The warrior tracked them from a distance, his steps as silent as the wind. He marked their pace, their weariness, the way their guard grew careless in the midday heat. He studied the land ahead, saw the canyon walls rising in the distance, and knew they would stop soon for shade. That would be the place, the moment when he would move. His spirit tightened with anticipation, his heart steady with resolve. Farther behind, the woman's father and his men pushed on, following faint signs along the trail. They saw the marks of hooves, the broken branches, the faint traces left behind. Each sign drew them closer, though none of them knew how near they truly were to both danger and salvation. The father rode harder, the fire in his chest unshaken, his mind filled only with the image of his daughter's face. As the captors entered the canyon, the air grew cooler, shadows stretching long across the ground. They dismounted, tossing their packs aside, tying the horses loosely while they rested. The woman was pulled roughly to the ground, her legs trembling, but her gaze still steady. She glanced toward the canyon walls, her heart pounding with the sense that the desert itself was watching, waiting, holding its breath. The warrior moved into position above, his body pressed against the stone, his bow ready in his hands. Every nerve in him burned with the need to strike, but he held his breath, waiting for the exact moment when silence would break into fury. The canyon below echoed with the careless voices of men who believed they were safe. The woman sat still, her chest rising and falling with the weight of waiting. The desert was silent, yet heavy with promise. The canyon held its shadows close, the wind whispering along the rocks like a song of warning. The warrior's eyes never left her, his spirit bound to hers as tightly as the ropes that held her down. The captors laughed, argued, and moved carelessly, blind to the storm above them. And in that suspended breath of time, when the earth itself seemed to wait, the warrior shifted his weight. His muscles coiled, his bow drawn. Every heartbeat carried him closer to the moment when silence would shatter, when love and danger would collide in a clash. That could not be undone. The woman's eyes lifted once more, as if she felt him above, as if hope itself was reaching down from the canyon walls. The air grew still, the canyon quiet, every sound pressed into silence. The warrior's gaze locked on his target, his spirit unbroken, his vow alive. The world held its breath, waiting for the first strike that would unleash the storm. The arrow left the bow with a sharp hiss, slicing through the still air of the canyon. It struck the first captor square in the shoulder, before he had even drawn breath to shout. The man staggered backward, dropping his weapon with a cry that echoed off the stone walls. Chaos broke like thunder. Horses reared, men scrambled, and the canyon, so quiet only moments before, filled with the clash of voices and the rush of movement. The woman's heart leaped in her chest. She did not see him clearly yet, but she knew. The strike had come from above, from the shadow she had hoped for, prayed for, clung to in silence. Her eyes scanned the canyon rim, and for a fleeting second, she saw a shape against the stone, a figure moving with precision and purpose. Relief and fear collided inside her, because she knew what his presence meant. He had come for her, but he would now face the wrath of every man who held her captive. The captors fired wildly toward the cliffs, bullets ricocheting against the rock. Dust filled the air, the smell of gunpowder heavy in the canyon. The warrior moved swiftly, never lingering in one place long enough to be caught. His arrows struck with precision, each one breaking their control, forcing them into panic. They shouted to one another, trying to rally, but fear was quicker than courage. The woman was dragged roughly to her feet by one of the men still standing. He held a blade to her throat, shouting toward the canyon walls, threatening what he would do if the warrior came closer. His voice cracked with desperation, a man clinging to power he knew was already slipping. She stood still, the cold edge of steel against her skin, her eyes searching the canyon rim. The warrior's gaze met hers from above, steady and unshaken. She did not cry out. She did not flinch. She trusted him. Another arrow flew, striking the ground near the man's feet, a warning more than a wound. Up. The captor cursed, dragging her tighter against him, but his hand trembled. The warrior's silence was more frightening than his arrows, and the man knew his time was short. A shot rang out, louder than the rest, and the captor stumbled, falling to the ground with his grip loosening. The woman pulled free, stumbling back into the dust. She turned and saw her father and the ranchmen riding into the canyon, rifles raised, faces fierce with determination. The battle turned in an instant. Trapped between the warrior's silent fury above and the settlers' fire from below, the remaining captors lost their ground. Horses bolted, men fled toward the canyon's edge, only to be cut down or driven into surrender. The clash that had begun with silence ended with a roar, then slowly gave way to stillness once more. Smoke hung in the air, the echoes fading against the stone walls. The woman sank to her knees, her wrists still bound, her body trembling from the weight of it all. Her father rushed to her side, cutting the ropes with hands that shook more from relief than anger. He held her close, whispering her name, his voice breaking with the fear he had carried for so long. She leaned into his embrace, but her eyes searched past him, toward the canyon rim. The warrior stood above, watching in silence. His bow hung at his side now, his body still as stone. He had come for her, risked everything, and fulfilled his vow. Yet he did not climb down, not yet. He knew the line between them was not drawn by her, but by the world they lived in. Her father's men were looking up now, rifles still tight in their hands, their eyes suspicious. They saw not a rescuer, but a man from a people they had been taught to fear. The woman rose slowly to her feet, steadying herself against her father's arm. Her voice was soft but strong as she told them who had saved her. She spoke not with fear, but with certainty, naming the warrior as the one who had risked his life to bring her back. Some of the men shifted uneasily, their anger at the captors bleeding into mistrust of the stranger above. But her father looked at her face, saw the truth in her eyes, and lowered his weapon. With a voice rough with gratitude, he called up to the canyon rim, thanking the warrior for what he had done. The warrior did not answer. Words were not his way. He only nodded once, a gesture of respect, and turned back into the shadows of the stone. The woman's heart ached as she watched him go, torn between the safety of her family and the bond she had felt with him in her darkest hour. She wanted to call out, to beg him to stay, but she knew his path was not one that could be easily joined to hers. In the days that followed, the ranch was filled with both relief and questions. Neighbors came, offering sympathy, bringing food, and listening as her father told the story of her rescue. Many praised the courage of the men who had ridden with him, but whispers spread of the silent warrior who had struck from the cliffs. Some doubted her words, unwilling to believe that an Apache had fought to save a settler's daughter. Others said it was proof that the world was changing, that not every story was as simple as friend and enemy. For the woman, life returned to routine, but nothing felt the same. The walls of the homestead no longer gave her the comfort they once had, because part of her spirit still looked to the horizon, to the ridges where shadows moved silently. She carried the memory of his eyes, steady and unbroken, the vow he had kept without words. She knew she owed her life to him, but it was more than that. In the stillness of the desert, a bond had been forged, one that time and distance could not erase. Her father noticed the change in her. He saw how her gaze wandered when the wind shifted, how her silence lingered when neighbors spoke of fear and hatred. Though he did not understand it fully, he respected it. He knew that what she had lived through could not be undone, and that the man she spoke of with quiet reverence had indeed given her back to him. Gratitude outweighed suspicion, even if only in his heart. The warrior returned to his people, but he carried her memory with him as surely as she carried his. Around the fire at night, he listened to the songs of his tribe, yet his thoughts drifted to her face in the glow of the canyon firelight. He did not seek her out, for he knew the world would not welcome such a union, but he also did not forget. Love had found him in the harshest place, and though it could not be claimed openly, it had changed him forever. The desert, with its silence and secrets, kept their story. It lived in the whispers of the wind, in the footprints long since washed away by storms, in the starlit nights where both of them, far apart, might lift their eyes and feel the same unspoken connection. It was a story of danger and courage, of captivity and rescue, but above all, of love that defied the boundaries the world tried to set. In time, the tale was told in different ways. Some spoke only of the settler's bravery. Others mentioned a shadowed figure who struck with arrows from above. The woman told it as it truly was, a story of how a warrior's vow saved her, how kindness had not been forgotten, how love had carried her through the darkest hours. And though some refused to believe, she never faltered in her truth. The land itself seemed to honor it. The canyon where the battle had ended grew quiet again, the stones holding the echoes of voices long gone. The ranch grew stronger, her family finding peace once more, though she often walked to the edge of the land at dusk, looking toward the ridges. Her father sometimes joined her, saying nothing, only standing beside her as the sun fell. He knew her heart was not bound only to the ranch anymore, but also to the desert beyond. The warrior never returned to her door, but he lived in her memory, not as a shadow, but as a man who had fought not for reward, not for pride, but for love. His presence lingered in the stillness of the night, in the way the wind moved through the grass, in the call of a lone wolf across the hills. She carried him with her always, and in that way they were never truly apart. Their story ended not with a union of lives, but with a union of spirits, bound by a love that had proven itself stronger than fear, stronger than hatred, stronger even than the silence of the desert. It was a reminder that in a land of endless struggle, there could still be moments of grace, moments where courage and love stood together. And as years passed, she would still whisper his name to the wind, knowing the desert carried it to him wherever he might be. It was enough, for their bond had never been about possession, but about honor. He had fought for her life, and in doing so, it given her something more hope, that even in the harshest of lands, love could rise and endure.